So, Pierre, I have prepared many questions to ask you, and yeah, I loved your article, and people who are live with us now probably know that what's the article about, and some of them may have probably read it as well. So, yeah, I have prepared some questions, but before I go to them, I want to ask you to please give us a little bit of your background and maybe just say where you are now and what you're doing at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll start by a warm welcome to everyone as we're figuring out technology and finding ourselves in the virtual space. So my name is Piotr, if you can pronounce it in Polish, or Pedro in Spanish, or Peter in English, because sometimes it's hard for people to pronounce. So a bit about my background and how I came to do this work that I do. I essentially was a science teacher initially. So my first background was actually in industrial biotechnology, believe it or not. And I remember going to fourth year of our university, and I wanted to know things. I wanted to understand things about life. And I thought, if I understand some of these building blocks, I'll be closer to, the mysteries that surround us. Well, little did I know that it didn't work like that at all. So I just remember pushing a button and my fourth year of university and thinking, is that it? I just put one gene from one organism to another, and that's it. So I knew very early that science wasn't something I was going to dedicate my life to. And then I trained as a teacher. I started working in an international school. Actually, I'm just thinking we can have the view of gallery. So there's both of us. Okay, we can do it like this. So I was a biology teacher working in international schools, and I moved to London, where I dedicated my time to work in pupil referral units with children who had psychiatric needs, children that had behavioral needs. In other words, they were just throwing chairs and tables, telling me to F off. And I did that for 6 years and started my journey training in transactional analysis counseling. For those of you who don't know what is transactional analysis, it is a system of humanistic psychology. It was developed in the 60s of the last century. And it's a very clever, quick, and heartfelt system, I would say, because it enables us to describe behaviors, feelings, and thoughts, but also what's happening between people. And it gives a map of concepts and metaphors that create change. So that's very powerful.
Simple language.
Yeah. So things like parent, adult, child, do I feel okay? What is the script? So what is the story that defines us? So those simple concepts of TA were very compelling to me. So as I trained in transactional analysis, I then moved into international education. And finally, after 3 years of working in a school in London, in an international school, I moved to Guatemala to train teachers in counseling skills. And I got really interested in intercultural issues. So thinking what happens in that space between cultures, and can we find something that is about essence and universality that can nourish our hearts so that we can face the world with courage. So currently I work as a coach with some leaders working in NGOs. I work as a counselor, also for the NHS in the UK, so doing short-term counseling, and in my private practice. And my clients are mostly international. I provide counseling in English, Polish, French, and Spanish. And I'm very interested, what is happening at this intersection of languages and cultures, and how do we use the resources in that space to make the world a better place, really? That's really it. Yeah.
I think you already answered to one of my questions. Because when I was reading your article, I was so appreciative of how open you were and honest in sharing your experiences, and it was all coming from your very personal feelings and experiences and communications with people who you've met in different countries. And it really made me curious to know what was behind this thinking and what made you actually um, think about writing something about it or reading about it more seriously and follow it. Yeah, I want to know a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. I like the question. Thank you. So what was it that sort of personally pushed me to write an article and make it so personal, right?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose on the one hand, all my experiences of living abroad, I lived in 4 countries. I went to university in 3 different countries. And as much as it is wonderful and interesting, there is a shadow aspect that I wanted to work out. So there is a sense, I sometimes felt lost in the world. I was asking myself, where do I belong? I felt confused at times when I was changing one culture to another. And in some way, I wanted to find out and work it out for myself by writing this article. How do we create coherence internally? What are the issues that people face in intercultural spaces? It's really about guiding myself through those complex experiences, because changing one culture to another has got deep repercussions. You change your whole perceptual system. Actually, I've got, my sunglasses here, and I just think, if you change sunglasses and if you have them, let's say, you can have them like this, but imagine if you're wearing like green sunglasses or yellow or blue, and after a while, you just feel confused. You cannot make meaning of your experience. So professionally, I just treated myself, as if I were a special education student, because I worked in special education. And what you do, you need to break things down. So I decided to break things down for myself so that it would be digestible and I could make meaning of these experiences and find myself, which to agree, I think I have through writing this.
Yeah. So you personally also wanted to understand your experiences and give meanings to them.
Yeah.
As well as writing professionally and really sharing it with more people. Okay. So, you start a paragraph of your article by saying multicultural individuals and groups face both opportunities and challenges. Then you also talk about uncovering, developing, and enhancing psychological resources. So, yeah, you face lots of challenges being in a multicultural communication, really, and also working multiculturally. But you have also found resources in them. Would you say about that, yeah, and what you mean? Yeah.
So let's just start. So on one hand, there are certain challenges. So the challenges would be that you may feel lost at times when you go from one culture to another. You may have difficulties to connect and to find intimacy, both personally and professionally. There's a sense of not belonging. There's confusion, loneliness, anxiety, kind of wonder, where is my place in the world? That's the most insidious aspect of that.
Yeah.
And my experience has always been, when you get with a group of international, open-minded people, there's a quality of empathy that emerges. There's acceptance of diversity. There is awareness of privilege that traveling the world, I'm not even talking about the carbon footprint, because this is an important part of that as well. How do we consider the travel in our relationship with the earth? But it's a huge privilege. It's a blessing. We get to live particular experiences that enrich us in ways
Mm.
that just were not possible 50, 100 years ago. Last night I was
Yeah,
talking to a lady in her 60s, and she was saying the world has become quite small since the 1970s. And this is
yeah,
true.
that's true.
It's,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Even the fact that you and I are talking now with the distance between us, maybe is like that, and having a intercultural and multicultural connection between us. We have a lot of different experiences and different backgrounds. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
How about oppression? Would you say about that?
Sorry, it just cut off. So can you say that again, please?
Yeah, about oppression.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, and how you experienced it. You had lots of examples in your article, and I
Mm,
and I
mm.
and I want you to talk about one of them, or maybe something new that comes to mind. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I will refer to the title of the article. So it's putting flesh on the bones of intercultural competence, and I would like to explain a little bit how that came about.
Yeah.
So I was going out of my house on one day, and essentially I got bitten by my neighbor's dog, and my neighbor just looked at me, and I said, "Oh, excuse me, your dog bit me." And she said, "Well, le gusta carne blanca, the dog likes white meat." And I just thought, okay, this is interesting, right? Why would someone treat me or imply that I objectify them a piece of meat,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
dog likes meat? So, but that was prejudice, let's say, in an individual interaction, because if we look at the bigger picture, systemic oppression is about those invisible lines that go through society that grant some people more opportunities and more access. So then I went on this journey and I asked myself, so what's happening in this interaction between my neighbor and myself? Also working at a Guatemalan university, I was asking myself, how come I'm feeling really at ease? And when I was living in the UK, I had a sense I had to prove myself. There was much more scrutiny. So then I became to reflect, what does my whiteness mean? And why am I granted this privilege of being seen as competent? Even though if my Spanish isn't great, I would somehow get this perception that I'm well educated. So that's not fair, is it? I didn't do anything. It's just that the system that gives me that sort of experience. So yeah, to answer your question, I was looking at in what ways am I benefiting, and in what ways do I experience prejudice? So for instance, if I get overcharged, on the bus or something, just because, the way I look, right?
Yeah. So you're really talking about power dynamics and understanding where are we in the map of and the dynamic of power, and to really recognize the power we hold.
Yeah.
And the power we do not hold, really.
Yeah. And I really like the works of Arnold Mindell, who's the founder of process-oriented psychology, who uses the concept of rank, which is the sum of your privileges. So things like being heterosexual, or being middle class, or being educated, or being able-bodied. And I would imagine that the majority of people who are watching this webinar are probably quite able in some way, and we don't think about it so consciously. I am able to walk. Yeah. So we're usually not fully aware of the power and rank we already have. For instance, when I was writing the article, one of the critiques I received from the editors, when I considered this experience of being bitten by the dog, they said to me, well, you're basically walking in your neighborhood and you're expecting to be safe. Do you see how this works? That I expect that this is the norm. I should be given that. How dare they? And actually, many people, if we consider the beginning of Black Lives Matter, many people feel threatened in society. They cannot have this expectation of being safe. They're not safe. So it's the power we don't acknowledge that shapes the situation.
Yeah. So if we understand the power and the dynamics and what we have actually, then we can have better expectations, you know. That's what you mean, right?
Yes. And
you talked a lot about language, and you know, because I had some similar experiences about language, and you know, obviously my English is my second language, and now I'm doing lots of talks and interviews, and sometimes it's difficult to find the right words, and so I'm thinking, am I saying the right thing? Am I not being polite or something? And it's like a continuous concern in the back of your mind that do you fit in good or not, or can you express yourself in the right way or not? And it's always there. And you also have written about that. Would you say a bit about this language general? Yeah.
I'll just come back to one point and move on to that. Because if we talk about resources and what can happen in an intercultural space, how can we, get on well? Understanding what is the frame of reference around the distribution of power. So understanding what dictates power dynamics, which is also related to language. So if we bring the awareness of that, then we can access the resources. Otherwise, we will be just creating oppression. So an example, English is a language that belongs to the majority culture. It's seen as dominant.
Yeah.
And one of the authors that I cited in the article says that dominant cultures make non-dominant cultures not okay. Yeah. So just by belonging to a majority, you already have got some power and rank because you're at ease. You're symbolized by people who are similar to you. You get that mirroring, which gives you comfort. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the same way, people who speak English as their first language do not always pay attention to how they speak, right? It's sometimes they just speak without actually knowing what does that mean for the person who's listening. I also gave an example in the article. I lived in the UK for 9 years, so I've learned English very well, but I notice that I can be impatient sometimes in some situations. So in some way, I want to compensate for other parts of me. I want to say, I want to belong to the majority. And there is Karen Minikin, another TA author. She talks about seduction of normativity. So we get seduced to belong to the mainstream. And it's this example of whether it's language, whether it is a sexual orientation, skin color, or particular cultural norms. We want to belong to the majority.
Yeah, and it actually comes from a sense of shame, and that comes also from that systemic oppression. And one of the very useful books that I've written during the last year actually was this. I think you've seen it, Dr. Dwight Turner. Yeah, and in a TA group we actually talked about it. It's called Intersections of Privilege and Otherness in Counseling and Psychotherapy, and it explains how dynamic happens also between a practitioner and a client. And that's right what you say.
Yeah, it's knowing how does the context of the interaction shape what's happening. And once we know that and owning that and bringing awareness into that, then we can start to deconstruct these systems, because we have to name these things. We have to make the inequality explicit. However, naming it creates some accountability, but that is not enough. Just naming it won't change it, because it is a phenomenon that's systemic. So I remember there's even some pieces of research, I think there was Malcolm Gladwell who was writing about that. If you look at unconscious bias and you have to put adjectives, things like black with, let's say, bad, or with different faces, even people of color would internalize this bias. So we live in a society, in a system of meaning making that unfortunately gets swallowed whole, internalized, and as a result, we perpetuate it. So we need to have awareness of that.
Yeah. And you really talk about intercultural dialogue. And you say there are some threats to that. There are some things that actually prevent us from having a dialogue interculturally. What are they? Would you want to say a bit about those? Okay. You recognized some of them in your article.
Yes, I do. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen and share this visual.
Sure.
Here it is. Let me just share my screen. Nice. Okay, here it is. Share screen, and we're going to this. Okay. All right, so let's just start here. So there are certain resources, there are certain treasures that are hidden in intercultural spaces. And if we get it right, we can uncover them. So that is the point, really. So here is theory. So here are the resources. I mean, I'm not going to go into that. The reference is below. So if anyone wants to read about that more, you can look at the article "Counseling as a Treasure Hunt." Fantastic article by Lieselot Fasbin-Kech from Switzerland. So when I was discussing the whole purpose of this article, one of my supervisors said to me, well, but why should we care? Now, what will motivate us to go through this process of digging if we don't know what we're looking for? What are the stakes? What is at stake? So here are the opportunities, such as in intercultural spaces, we can have a sense of purpose. So quite often the clients I work with who are intercultural, they're looking for deeper meaning. They want to have place in the world and express the values that is personally significant to them. So they're looking for the purpose, and accounting for that is crucial. Also a sense of global responsibility. So how are my actions here influencing the greater system? I find that with some of my friends who either live in Guatemala and or they're in Europe or in other parts of the world, they ask themselves, how does the local translate into the global? And it's a big point for them. It's a preoccupation that comes up in sessions. The next one is reflective engagement. And this one is actually quite funny, to be honest, because it's, how can we think together about systems and culture in a way to see beyond that. So let me give you an example. When I was working in the international school in London, we had this discussion at the lunch table. My father shared a quote from Stalin, which was, "We won't allow those capitalist swines to enter our socialist garden." So then we just had, a discussion for weeks going on about what is a socialist garden and, can you have a capitalist garden and all of that. So quite often when you go into those intercultural spaces, people something out, they're very interested and very determined to build new meaning and deconstruct the systems and the outdated stuff. So they want to update what is not working. And ecological awareness. I find that for many individuals that have had an intercultural lifestyle, they start to consider what's the impact. Now we can think, okay, it's quite hypocritical because at the same time we're traveling and creating, a carbon footprint.
Yeah.
However, I think it is changing at the moment, and more people are considering the impact of their diet and the choices, what they buy, what they want to reduce plastic. So this is what is at stake. Yeah. All these juicy resources that are listed here. And, well, as I said, it resides on power dynamics, so understanding what is the frame of reference that determines the distribution of power. Who belongs to the majority? Who gets to have the last word? Yeah. So that is a threat that can stop the access to these resources.
Yeah.
It's also about
like
constructs of self. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's like a wall that maybe doesn't let you see those resources, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you found those intersubjective space and intersubjective like confrontation of two people as an opportunity to have a reflective engagement and make meaning together. And you found that people in these situations are more open to maybe update their outdated stuff and change their frames of reference, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if that is happening on the boundary, or two things just come together. So the question is, what's the inequality that can emerge? So some of the other threats, I'm just going to list them, not go into details as much, but there are the threats that can come in the way, what can diminish meaningful intercultural contact. These are constructs of self. So for instance, do we belong to a culture that's individualistic, or is it collectivistic? And that will influence really how we experience self and another. Because in the West, we often think that problems are very much, reside in individuals.
Yeah.
But if we have an idea of the self being relational, then we need to bring in the wider context.
Yeah.
I
think it's also useful to acknowledge that TA, I know some of people who will watch this are TA practitioners, how TA is coming from an individualistic culture and how it puts emphasis on individual more than on group and relationships with the group, even in defining autonomy sometimes.
Yeah. It's the space we have. And what happened about a few minutes ago, it's, speech compatibility, because we come from different cultures and the rhythms we have change from one culture to another.
Yeah.
And it's, so the other piece around culture attunement. How do we tune into the meaning making of another culture with respect and feeling what is significant for them? Because we can superimpose our experience, and then it creates reductionism. So we may perceive certain practices as unsophisticated or uncivilized, which is the case in Guatemala, for instance, that sometimes Mayan people are seen as not as evolved in comparison to the Western culture, even though they have a very beautiful system of meaning making and philosophy and technical aspects. Okay, I'll stop sharing this. Is that all right?
Yeah, thank you for sharing the models. It's very, very helpful and very beautiful, actually. Yeah, it really helps. to keep those in mind. So my next question will be more particularly about TA, and maybe we can talk a little bit about TA concepts and how they can help us understand the dynamics in such situations. And I know you've done a lot of reading and searching in TA literature to be able to do an analysis about it and write your article. Yeah, I want to know your findings about that, and maybe we can discuss it a little bit.
Okay, so it's quite a broad question. So would you like me to say which ideas in TA are the most useful in understanding intercultural spaces?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll explain it. Actually, I'm going to take a piece of paper to explain this to people who are not TA.
Great.
So I always go back to this idea of what is a frame of reference. I mean, it's when it was introduced into common language as well, but the very specific idea, or what is a frame of reference? It's a structure. So like this piece of paper, it's a structure. And in transactional analysis, we talk about ego states. So there is a parent, an adult, and a child. So there are three patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving.
Yeah.
So just to say a bit more, so transactional analysis looks at patterns. It's called transactional because we interact, and these are called transactions. So the ego states are presented usually as three circles. So imagine if I had three of these oranges. Okay, I need one more. This is the parent, the adult, and the child. And they're surrounded by a skin, like if this is wrapped, this is like the filter on reality called the frame of reference. So these are the glasses, right? What makes you perceive the world in a particular way? In cognitive psychology, they would call them cognitive structures and whatnot. So this is my cognitive structure, and I see the world according to this culture I grew up in. So I can see it. If I never leave my country of origin, that will sort of stay, or maybe get a little bit bigger. But essentially, when you go through experiences that are intercultural, you enlarge your frame of reference. You become, aware of more aspects of reality. Now you can see both of my eyes. Yeah. So
yeah.
What happens is, if you keep expanding and expanding your frame of reference, you keep learning and traveling and go from one country to another. I remember those situations. I think in 3 weeks, I was living in the United States. Then I went for 2 weeks to Poland, and I went for a year to France. I remember waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning and just like wondering, what language do they speak here? What's going on? So you see, when we expand the frame of reference, we lose a little bit. We are very flexible and adaptable, but this is a confusing experience. We lose the coherence of the self. So an important aspect of the frame of reference as a concept of transactional analysis is that how do we look after ourselves in that expansion so it's not too drastic. If it's too drastic, we will feel confused and lost and anxious. So that is one example of how transactional analysis, or what are the concepts that can help us.
So it's like we need that structure, but also we need it to be flexible and need to expand it and need to have more space in actually being more open to different cultures.
I'd like to add as well a very important concept is about okayness. So transactional analysis has got this message or slogan, which is I'm okay, you're okay. Sometimes the simplified language leads to TA being misunderstood as not being sophisticated, which it isn't. So okayness goes back to having a sense of dignity, self-validity, in self-importance, in being self-accepting and compassionate. And it's how our self-esteem gets played out in the world. So if we are belonging to a minority culture, we're not going to feel okay about ourselves. So as I said before, the dominant cultures make non-dominant cultures not okay. And that concept is very important when we consider systemic oppression. Who gets to define what is okay?
Yeah.
That question, I think, can guide us into the inquiry of wanting to dismantle systems of oppression.
Yeah. Something that Julie Hay actually added to this concept in her windows on the world is a new window that she calls "Are You" position. And it's like I am and you are, and nothing more. Because she talks about this constructive view that says we don't know what is okay, and we cannot define okay without knowing the context. The only thing that we know is that we are. And having that in mind is like also being open to give meaning in different situations. And yeah, it's like being non-judgmental about what is okay and what is not, you know.
I suppose it's a lovely way to aspire to. And I would also say that we carry biases. So in some way, we cannot completely shed our frame of reference. We need to be aware of what we bring and what are the biases that we inherited from our culture. So yes, I am and you are, and that.
Yeah. And it's also about the fact that in some context we cannot have psychological analysis like in a war. She strongly disagrees that we have some analysis of okayness in a situation like war, because we cannot say one side is okay and one side is not, or how they can shift positions. And it's beyond psychology, it's beyond something like life script. You also wrote in your article how Eric Berne actually had a reductionistic view of not considering the context sometimes, or these systemic view of systemic oppression, and here kind of reduced everything to life script to have an analysis on that. But there are some things that goes beyond that, I mean, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's one theory, it's one way of thinking. And when I introduce TA in Guatemala, I say to the participants, this is one way of thinking and describing human behavior, and there are many other ones. And let's see how they might come together. And as you say, in some situations, this is beyond the capacity to think about it and experience. It's very, beyond words.
The analysis, really, to do because it's not psychological anymore. It's a real war happening, and people have no choice in deciding to feel okay or not okay, because they're in danger and not safe, actually. So that sometimes that okayness cannot be defined, who is okay and who is not. That's really what I got from So after all, after having all of this in mind, and the frame of reference and the resources and the threats you recognize, you build the model. And I'd like to talk about your model also. And
Okay.
maybe you can again share your screen. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
whatever.
I'll share the screen. I think, we've got roughly about 20 minutes, I believe. I will resend the article for anyone, actually, or anyone who would like to get the article, please email me. And I will talk about the model of intercultural work and how oppression gets created. You can go and have a look and have a peek in the article.
Great.
Yes. Okay. Right. So let me just go to this. Okay. Right. And show. And here, show. Okay, so this is the model of intercultural work that emerged from my experiences. Just going to move this a little bit here. Okay, so
and you've got the idea from co-creative TA, right? The integrated adult.
Yes. So we have two people here for the participants who are not TA. Think of that this is person A and person B. And they, and they're like two snowmen, okay? Just to simplify it, and they've got like three patterns. On top of the circles, that's the parent. So these are the patterns that we inherit from culture, the authority figures, parental figures. At the bottom, we have the child. And in the middle, that's the adult. And here, it's a specific type of adult that is very smart, very loving, very open, very spacious, mindful, compassionate, the integrating adult. So it's the capacity that we have to reflect on the stuff that happened in the past and the stuff we got from our parents and authority figures. So we are fully in the now. Okay, that's the integrating adult. And it's on both sides. So this person has got the frame of reference, the system of meaning making. And this person also has got a system of meaning making. Now, this is where the messiness starts, okay, in practice, because it looks lovely on the model, on this model. And in reality, this is about the preparedness and vulnerability to be in a relationship, to notice the frustrations, the redefining, so how we don't understand each other, and persist with curiosity to create a shared understanding of each other. Okay. I have to emphasize that this process is messy. Okay. And it's not that lovely. Okay. And it's a lot of presence and curiosity that's needed for this. Okay. And we also have got the cultural frame of reference. So outside is the individual frame of reference. So that structure that enables us to perceive the world. So the sunglasses. And inside, the cultural frame of reference is, think of that as your muscles. So outside we have got the skin, inside we've got muscles. The cultural frame of reference is a subsystem of personality and the frame of reference. It's like in between. Yeah. And we could think of the script of our self-concept as the skeleton, the bones. Yeah. So we've got these two people that are trying to find each other, and you need to keep a balance, because if we say, well, we just need to find a shared area, if everything is shared, what is individual? How do you know who you are? So there are two important things we need to do. We need to make this, shared area, the shared frame of reference, and ensure that individual cultural frames of reference are expanded but preserved. So in other words, Ashkan, if I were to go through this process with you, I would need to find common language with you. But let's say if you don't eat meat, and if I give you Polish sausage every day, you'll be like, why are you trying to, you would have to deny a part of you. So the question is, how do you preserve yourself in this process? Okay.
Yeah, and you
And
also talked about how it's important so that we can have the identity and not to become lost in that intercultural space, not knowing what is our language and where we are and what we carry in our personalities and everything. So it's a necessity actually to preserve what we have.
yes, and the metaphor I like to use, so if you lose the individual identity, you become the melting pot or the smoothie, and we all get mixed up and we all go to McDonald's and, you know, wear Nike shoes eventually.
Yeah.
So it's not about that. What you want to preserve individual identity. So you want to have a fruit salad, you know, that kind of comes nicely together. And we've got the vectors of transactions, so how we interact. We want to be adult and mature with each other and compassionate in an ideal world. And we need to own the context. So understanding how the bigger system gives us power or maybe gives us less power. So in some situations, I would be assigned more privilege due to my skin color.
Yeah.
But let's say if I speak in a quintessentially British environment, I will have less power. So if people around me own the context and they are aware that I don't belong to the majority, they have the power to put me at ease and create more space between us. So the people with privilege need to have the awareness of what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also need to own the context and understand and own myself. Oh, this is a context that maybe is challenging for me. And I have personal responsibility to look after myself and know my value, regardless of the context. So we're co-creating this shared frame of reference, this system of meaning making that enables us to understand each other. So a quote from the shifts say that there needs to be enough of a shared frame of reference so that transactions are meaningful. If we don't share a worldview, there won't be enough exchange and meaning present between us. And as I mentioned, we want to expand cultural frames of reference. So you want to open your frame of reference and the cultural frame of reference for new ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving, while also having your primary cultural identity. So I am Polish. I have got patterns that are inherited from my culture. I lived in the UK for 9 years. So I expanded my cultural frame of reference. Now I'm living in Guatemala. And what is the sense of continuity? So how do I remember where I came from? So it's about owning that versus when we talk about intercultural sensitivity. So disowning one's culture, it's called reversal. So like, well, you know what? I'm just going to be English. I'm going to be Guatemalan. And, you know, and never mind that I'm Polish. But actually, I'm all of those pieces together. And I need to put them as a fruit salad in myself.
Yeah, in an integrated way, rather than pushing some parts down and so repressing some of things that you carry with you.
Yeah, so this is how I think about intercultural work, as having the awareness of the context and the privileges it grants to some people, so that we can draw on that privilege in the service of promoting equality.
And now I'm thinking what's actually what matters in such situation is to find that space of having a shared frame of reference and find the space of common language and common frame of reference to actually being able to communicate. And it's not always easy to find that.
No, And I'll stop sharing my screen, I suppose. I'm just thinking about an example, actually. When I go to get a haircut in a Guatemalan barber, let's say, in my little town where I live, and I go in there, and there's, how they all have got those pictures of, hairstyles, and you can choose. I'm going to the hairdresser, and mostly everyone, the people of color, they've got darker skin. And the pictures on the wall, you see blonde little kids with blue eyes. And this is very grotesque. So I go to the hairdresser, and then I look at the wall and I say to the guys, like, "Oh, guys, have you ever considered that this picture doesn't represent your clientele?" And they just look at me and they're like, "Why are you mentioning that?" Which just goes to show that how oppression gets perpetuated without awareness.
Yeah. And that also comes to acknowledging the resources you have and acknowledging what you have, but you're not representing, or you're not expressing, or you're not showing the things you have, the things you carry. You in your model, in the first model, you show things from your past, things from present, and things from future. I think that model of resources are very helpful to understand how we can facilitate building that shared frame of reference.
Yeah. And, well, we have to face a certain existential truth. If we don't do it, the world won't be in a good place. That if we don't take full awareness of our responsibility vis-a-vis these systems, it's not going to be a nice place to be. And the world isn't a nice place to be for some people. And those of us who have the privilege of comfort, even having this conversation, to be able to think about oppression, as you mentioned the war earlier on, and you said, well, those situations are beyond analysis and words and understanding. So even this, it is a privilege to think about it. And I ask myself, what do I do? How do I use that comfort given to me to influence the world? Yeah.
And we have both done many translations, and we really face this situation of actually building bridge between two frames of reference and two ways of understanding to facilitate connection and communication. I'm
just wondering, perhaps there are some questions in the chat. Let's just see, actually.
I like to check that as well.
Yeah.
Can you see the chat?
Let me have a look.
See if there are. Okay.
Okay. Oh, some people say, there are some people that say they're glad to hear. Okay. Let's see if we have any questions, or maybe people can text us the questions however they wish. No, we don't have any questions yet, so let's just ask for people in the chat. If anyone would like to ask a question, I can take a couple of questions before we close.
Yeah. And I also want to ask my last question, and that is, what are some suggestions or ideas that you would like to share with people who are in the beginning of experiencing these situations of working interculturally or multiculturally? What are some personal things? Is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything that you think might be helpful?
I would say that the most important aspect of this is starting from presence and awareness. when we, sometimes people look into intercultural work and they say, oh, you have to be aware that, let's say, Asian cultures are more collectivistic, and they look at the bigger picture, or these are, and we have this idea, oh, there are some ways of being, I need to guess them, and once I guess them, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
I don't think it works like that at all. If anything, it's about an openness and a sense of curiosity and warmth towards yourself first, because this can be confusing and stressful, and then extending this to others, so that space that's shared, it can emerge, it can come up from contact versus any theories or tips. Yeah. I would say that's the first thing. See how you feel, what drives you to be there. That's the starting point. Which leads me, well, I did send this in the email. If anyone wants to download this guide about cross-cultural communication. So I think of 3 basic things here. So once you've got that contact, that presence, that awareness, curiosity, warmth, and aliveness, you develop awareness. You develop awareness of how you're perceived, how you perceive the other. So then you accumulate your experience, and then your frame of reference gets wider. The second piece is about staying embodied. So any emotional regulation needs to come back to the body, to the breath, to the emotions, and staying responsive internally, close to yourself. That's the second piece. And then the final one, actually, that I put at the very end is about recognizing patterns. Whether, these are different theories of culture, for instance, Hofstede model of cultural dimensions, you name it. There's a number of them, but just start to see what are the patterns that you need to respond to. And then you can start to find your way little by little. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a very useful model. It was called Wheel of Power, I think. And it had lots of aspects to show, and you could track where you might be privileged, where you might hold the power, and where you might actually discount something that maybe you're discounting in other people, and people are discounting in you. And the model was called Wheel of Power, I guess. It was also very useful. Yeah.
Do you have any questions in the chat on YouTube?
Let's check. Well, I cannot see any. Can you see any questions?
No, I don't believe that there are. What do you mean by losing coherence of self? Oh, that's a question.
Oh,
I love the question. Okay. So when you're feeling confused, when you lack clarity, when you sometimes, or for instance, what happens after a breakup, or what happens after a difficult experience, we feel fragmented. We feel like our experience isn't coming from a sense of integration. So you go into extremes. Or maybe I love this person, or maybe I hate that person, maybe this, maybe that, and we are very jumpy and unsettled. So that's what I would say, is when we cannot hold the totality of the experience, and we go into overthinking, or we go into extreme emotions, and the narrative, that the story we tell ourselves internally just becomes all over the place. So is that enough as an answer?
So is it like, do you find different parts of yourself experiencing different things, and you cannot sense any coherence or integration? Different things you want or need.
And what enables to find that coherence would be self-compassion and acceptance. So coming back to okayness. And if we consider, this model, like, okay, so we're all the same, we're like a melting pot, we're like a smoothie, or we're like the fruit salad. So you can have a fruit salad that's dry and you've got like different fruits that don't go together. You're just going to put like a pineapple and an orange and a mandarin, and it's all very sour. Yeah. So if you lose the coherence of self and you've put like lots of pineapples and oranges and very sour fruits, you want to add some honey, or you want to add maybe something that will counterbalance. So it's like cooking. You want to sprinkle the whole experience with compassion, love, and acceptance. I will always come back to that. Yeah, it's the essence of who we are.
Yeah, a beautiful metaphor you use. Yeah, like making connection between different aspects of ourselves. Yeah, and to accept and understand in a compassionate way. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we see if there's any more questions in the channel? It doesn't. I'll see if there's anything else there. Okay, I think this is it. So we had one question here. So I believe it is okay for us to sum up and say goodbye.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, and yeah, I want to thank all the people who were live with us, and say that we will add, wherever you're watching this video, we will add the contact details, and yeah, you can contact Piotr or me for any questions or comments for about this session or anything else. Yeah. And thank you, Piotr, for giving this opportunity to talk about your article and sharing your models. I found them very, very helpful to gain a better understanding of the situation, especially that I have this intercultural dialogues and conversations online with many people, and yeah, can experience it. We can all experience it more these days with online platforms and online works. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to say then goodbye to everyone, and I'll leave you with this thought. In one of the Mayan languages spoken in Guatemala, the question, how are you, is, how are your eyes today? And the answer, if you're fine, is, my heart is open. And if we go back to this idea of frame of reference, if being fine means that your heart is open, that means you're in true contact, in true relationship with another. And that's one of the biggest learnings that I take away from living and working here. So thank you very much, everyone. If you would like to follow me on Instagram, that's iFlowCoach, or just type my name. And I've sent out link to a guide about cross-cultural communication. So you're very welcome to claim that if you wish to. So yeah, thanks very much, everyone.
Great, thanks to everyone. Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Okay.
Okay.